This is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. And we love talking about science on this program, or the intersection between faith and science. And one of the leading Catholic voices out there in this space is Dr. Gerard Verschuuren. And he is the author of a brand new book. It's called A Beautiful Mind and Soul. We'll be so interested to talk to him about his latest offering. He's the author of numerous Catholic books that all talk about this intersection of faith and science. So we'll be looking at what makes up a beautiful mind and soul. Today, to be talking to somebody who has written numerous books about this space between the intersection of faith and science, and you can go to his website to find out more about in any of these incredible books. And a brand new book is out from Dr. Gerard Verschuuren, and that is entitled A Beautiful Mind and Soul. Welcome back to the program today, Dr. Gerard.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me on your show.
Well, it's great to talk with you again, and I love your work. I love that you shine a light on this important aspect of faith and science. There are many people who say that the faith doesn't belong at all in the science discussion, and you can't even talk about faith and talk about science at the same time. So, why is this important to you personally to sort of tackle this very tricky and challenging topic of faith and science?
I am always confronted by scientists who say, how can you be a Catholic, and how can you, to put it in terms of the book we are talking about, how can you talk about mind and soul? And that's a very important issue, because science doesn't believe in mind and soul. And so they cannot prove that there is such a thing. So they always challenge me, tell me how that is possible. And then the first thing I tell them is science cannot prove that, but they can neither prove that there is no mind and soul, because mind and soul is not a material issue, and science necessarily deals with material issues. Does that mean there is nothing else but material issues? If you say that, then I say immediately that is materialism. And first of all, materialism is a belief, and it's not material. So you are even denying your own materialism if you say there are only material things. And my second reason is always to say, I use that famous example of if you have a metal detector, it is perfect to detect metals, material things. But of course, it cannot detect anything else. It cannot even detect plastic. So there is something wrong in that discussion. So I wrote this book with a format of a lively dialogue between a skeptical scientist and a religious scientist. And that's what you talked about already when you talk about miracles. There are skeptical scientists and there are religious scientists. I happen to belong to the second category.
Absolutely. We're talking today with Dr. Gerard Verschuuren about his book, A Beautiful Mind and Soul. And one of the challenges when we talk about the science in this discussion with religion is science itself becoming a religion. You talk about this a little bit in the book as well. What are the challenges, and why does that happen when people abandon any sense of belief in God and they replace that with a belief in science?
My most important argument is science has a lot of assumptions. It assumes that we live in an objectively real world, otherwise science would not be possible. It assumes that there is order in nature, otherwise science would not make any sense. It assumes that like causes have like effects, otherwise science would not be possible. It assumes that the world is comprehensible, otherwise science would not be possible. So all these assumptions cannot be proven by science. So where do those assumptions come from? My argument is, and I argue that in the book too, that they come basically from our belief in God. God is the creator of this world. He created order. He created nature. He created causes and effects. He did all of that. Without religion, we are not even able to found our scientific experiences on anything. They are just hanging in the air. They are floating in the air.
Yeah, this is an important discussion, and I love with your title of the book, "A Beautiful Mind and Soul." There's a famous movie out some years ago called "The Beautiful Mind," so this is somewhat of a takeoff on that name, "A Beautiful Mind and Soul." And I think it's important, as you do in the book, you talk about, what is the soul anyway? I mean, we some people might see it as an animating force in our bodies and bringing us to life and allowing us to live, and other people see it as an eternal reality. Where does this idea of a soul come from anyway?
The idea has a very old root. It was already there before Jesus came on the scene. It was there already even in Greek philosophy. The soul is, we can go into all kind of technical discussions. I think I will not bother your audience with that. But the soul has, according to Thomas Aquinas, an intellectual part, which is the mind, and it has a voluntary part, the human will. Without the human mind, there would be no rationality in this world. And without a human will, there would not be morality, good acts, bad acts. And the rationality makes it possible to have good arguments and bad arguments, to know what is true and what is false. Morality tells us what is good and what is evil. So thanks to the soul, we can do all of that. I always like to quote the famous biologist Haldane, J.B.S. Haldane, and the apologist Lewis, C.S. Lewis. They use a famous paradox in the following line. If I believe that my thoughts are the mere products of neural activities in the brain, then I have no reason to believe my thoughts are true. Therefore, I have no reason to believe that my thoughts are the mere product of neural activities. Whew, that is a mouthful. It's worth pondering, that one. That tells me that the mind is very different from the brain. A lot of scientists think that the mind is nothing but the brain. But if that were the case, we would be in real trouble. The mind has concepts such as, let's say, gravity. Thanks to that concept, which is not a brain issue, but a mind issue, we can see things, the similarity between the motion of the moon and the fall of an apple. So that is where our rationality comes in. And all those concepts are universal. They are not about one specific particular case. They go for all cases. Gravity applies to many, many, many issues in this universe. So where does that concept come from? Not from the brain. If that were the case, then it depends on the brain. And if the brain disappears because we die, then there would be no universal concept anymore. They exist independent from our brain. And that is an important thing to know. For concepts have no weight, no shape, no color. They are universal.
We're talking today with Dr. Gerard Verschuuren, author of the new book, A Beautiful Mind and Soul. And we've talked about the soul, but can science actually separate the soul from the body? Should those concepts be considered separate, or is there a more integrated view of the soul and the body?
According to Thomas Aquinas, and he basically goes back to Aristotle. That's why the famous bust on the cover of the book is from Aristotle, and though it says my name next to it, it's not me. So it's I don't like that part about it, but that bust is basically about Aristotle. So Aristotle makes already a distinction between body and soul. And Thomas Aquinas builds on that. And he said they form a unity. The body is the material part, and the soul is the form part. And those two are intertwined. They come together. They keep each other intact. So we always think, when we talk about body and soul, we think like René Descartes did, the philosopher. He thought that the soul meets the body somewhere in the brain, and there is an interaction kind of organ. That is what they call dualism. I have to stress that Thomas Aquinas is not a dualist. He said they form a unity. They are together, and there is no body without a soul, and there is no soul without a body. He has to work on that later on, for we say in the Creed every Sunday, we say that there will be a resurrection of the body, and apparently the soul can exist without the body, but it's not completely independent from the body. But it's together, they form a unity. And it's that unity that Thomas Aquinas will always stress. There is a unity between those parts. So a body without a soul is a corpse, and a soul without a body is a weird ghost.
Very well put. We're talking today with Dr. Gerard Verschuuren, one of the top voices in this conversation about faith and science. Can they go together? Can they be discussed in the same breath? And his new book is A Beautiful Mind and Soul. And you wrap up the book talking about the future of the body and soul after death. Of course, we talk about the body being temporal and the soul being eternal. But there is the concept of what happens after we die, where the body and the soul are considered again. So, what can we talk? What's a part of this discussion of the journey back home as after we die?
I have to be honest with you. I haven't gone through that process yet, so I cannot talk from personal experience. But we know. I mentioned in the book several arguments that make it very likely, even for skeptical scientists, that there is a life after death. Mm-hmm. So I give an example of how do most people call that? But there are people who went through a flat EEG. That means that their brain was not working anymore, and they still experience things. Those were amazing kind of fact, out-of-body experiences, they call that very often. So I use that in my book to show that there could very well be life after death. Those people went somehow through a death experience, but they didn't really die, but they had very interesting data about all of that, what they experienced, what they could see, though their eyes were closed, so it was not a physical issue. And what is even more interesting is that we even know about children who went through that experience. You know, with adults, you can always say, oh yeah, they have always heard about heaven, and they think about that in terms of what they were taught. But when children do that, very young children, they don't have that kind of background. And yet, it is a very common event that people go through all of that. So there is, as I say, there is something that surpasses death. And that surpassing death is the soul. And the soul can be united later on at the last judgment with the bodies. We probably say, how is that possible? Well, if you realize that biology tells us that our bodies are not a given immutable fact. They keep changing all the time. Mm-hmm. We probably have hardly any cell left in our bodies that is from the time that we were born. They get renewed and rebuilt when people unfortunately get amputated or stuff like that, do they still have the same body? I would say so. So their identity is not in every body part. It is above it, beyond it. It transcends it. It goes above it. And that's what I try to prove in my book. But I won't go into the details. That's why I say read the book, and you will find a lot of information on that issue.
Wonderful. Well, we're so grateful to you, Dr. Gerard Verschuuren, for leading the way in this discussion of faith and science. I think it's such an important thing that all Catholics and people of faith need to keep in mind. And you've written numerous books on this topic, and the brand new book is A Beautiful Mind and Soul. I encourage everybody out there to pick this one up. Thank you so much, Dr. Gerard Verschuuren, for being with us on today's program.
Thank you, Mike.